back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is my one single deck tech that I will be doing from March of the Machine Aftermath. I put a poll in the video of the top 10 commanders from that set, which of course isn't really much of a set because it was only 50 cards. The winner though was Rocco Street Chef, which is good because of course I thought that was the most interesting commander from this set. A lot of neat things you can do with this commander, I think. Red, green, and a white elf druid 2/4. At the beginning of your end step, each player exiles the top card of their library until your next end step. Each player may play that card they exiled this way. Interesting sort of huggy effect there, but what you really want to build around is whenever a player plays a land from exile or cast a spell from exile, you may put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and create a food token. There is a lot of neat, interesting things you can do with this commander, believe it or not. The first thing though I will talk about is the fact that Exile Tribal is so incredibly popular in the format now. I just did a short about 5 cards that can go in just mono red decks alone because everyone's always casting stuff from exile. I have a couple of them in this deck. So really you could get away with not building around your commander at all and have that ability trigger all the time. People are constantly in every commander game now casting or playing lands from exile. Of course, you can get that trigger off your commander's first ability. So you are guaranteed to be getting it even if you don't do it, but that's all you really need. You don't really need to build around anything else at all. I think we want to a little bit though. For me, mostly I am building around that last ability of I'm making food tokens, I'm putting +1/+1 counters on my creatures. I want to take advantage of both of those abilities before I build around the first part because I think it's going to be happening a whole lot in any given commander game and I want to be able to take advantage of what's happening there. Of course, getting a food tokens and the +1/+1 counters is going to be good. I guess again, you don't really have to build around it, but we can take more advantage of it. All right, let's start with the +1/+1 counters because that's the easiest thing to use, of course. And obviously just putting +1/+1 counters on your creatures is always going to be good, but we want specific creatures here that will be great fits like Incubation Druid. For example, we just throw a +1/+1 counter on that guy and now it will be tapping to add 3 mana. So cards like that are just a very easy slot in this deck. I put Mareth, Will of the Wild in the deck. I thought that was a great fit. There is a creature that wants us to be piling counters on it. Typically you see this as a commander obviously, but you're going to pay X and remove X +1/+1 counters from Mareth and choose 1, put X counters on another creature. It deals X damage to any target, or you can put an XX elemental creature into play. So there is a creature that wants to be having counters piled on it so that we can be taking them off to do all sorts of different stuff. I think that's a great fit in the deck. Cryptic Trilobite is a really interesting one. XX Trilobite 00 enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. So of course, if we pay 2 mana, it enters the battlefield with 1 counter on it, and we can remove a +1/+1 counter from Cryptic Trilobite to add 2 colorless, spend this mana only to activate abilities. Well, guess what? We have a great ability that's going to be all over the place in this commander deck. Of course, those food tokens that can use that 2 colorless mana very easily. I thought that was a pretty neat fit in the deck because of course, whenever someone plays something from exile, we will put a counter on our Cryptic Trilobite and then make a food token. And then we can just remove the counter we put on our Cryptic Trilobite to sack the food token that we just made if we need to gain life, which we might need to do. We can also use that mana for other abilities like our Steelbane Hydra, which is a great fit with the +1/+1 counter theme. X green Turtle Hydra 00 enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and you can pay 2 and a green, remove a +1/+1 counter from Steelbane Hydra to destroy target artifact or enchantment. So there is a great repeatable ability that we can have, removing those +1/+1 counters, which of course we can keep putting back on it. Mikius the Lunarch, another great creature that we can be piling counters on. We can play this guy for 2 mana. He comes into the battlefield, only has 1 counter on him, but we can keep putting counters on him, and then he'll keep removing counters from himself to put those counters on all of our other creatures, which is great. Woodfall Primus, this is another direction you can go here, right? Because of course it has Persist, which puts the -1/-1 counter on it. And of course, if you then put a +1/+1 counter on your Woodfall Primus after it has died, those 2 counters will cancel each other out. So if it dies again, it will come back again and we can destroy another non-creature permanent. So great option there for the +1/+1 counters. and I put Hierophant Biotitan in the deck as well. I thought this was a great fit. I guess any deck where you're doing the +1/+1 counter theme, it seems like a pretty neat fit. 10 green, Tyrannid 12/12. That's an expensive creature. However, as an additional cost to cast this spell, you may remove any number of +1/+1 counters from among creatures you control. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each counter removed this way. So say we have 3 random counters lying around on our creatures. We remove those counters when we cast this. It's going to cost 6 less. So it's only going to cost 6. That's not too shabby for a 12/12 Vigilance Reach Ward 2 creature. Pretty good. And also can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So it's going to be a pretty decent finisher in the deck. And of course, we can start piling counters on this guy after that as well. Of course, if we are making food, treasure, or clue tokens, we're going to have to play Academy Mana Factor. And in this case, we are making food tokens. Every single time a food token is created under our control, we will get a clue and a treasure as well. That's pretty fantastic value. Of course, as I've been saying since this card ever came out in Modern Horizons 2, if you're ever doing any of those themes, treasure, food, or clue, this card's probably an auto-include, so of course it's going to go in this deck as well. Halcyon and Jaheiri, great fits here because now those food tokens, which of course aren't really that great, we can now pay 1 with Halcyon to turn them into 4/4 bear tokens to be attacking with, and Jaheiri can use those food tokens to tap for mana. That's particularly good, right? Because of course, tokens you control have tap, add a green. So now all those food tokens that we are creating, we can now be tapping to use essentially as mana rocks. We can also be sacrificing them. I got Umbral Gear Smasher in here and Brea's Apprentice. Umbral Gear Smasher, we can just tap and sacrifice an artifact to have it do 2 damage to each opponent. Not too shabby. And Brea's Apprentice, we can tap and sacrifice an artifact to either give target creature +2/+0 until end of turn, or exile a top card of your library until your next turn. You may play that card, and of course that's doing the exile tribal thing, which we want to be doing in this deck, right? Let's not forget, this is whenever a player plays a land from exile or casts a spell from exile, so that includes you as well. So now I can sacrifice a food token to my Brea's Apprentice to get that impulse draw and then play something else and get another food token to replace it. Throne of Geth is a really interesting one. 2 mana artifact, tap, sacrifice an artifact to proliferate. So of course, we're going to have lots of those artifact tokens lying around that we can sacrifice to this. And then of course, the proliferate works really well with the +1/+1 counters. Reckless Fireweaver and Hedron Detonator want lots of artifacts to be entering the battlefield under control. So that's going to work great. It's going to be dealing damage to our opponents, going to help us close out the game. Hedron Detonator in particular, tap, sacrifice 2 artifacts, exile a top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So again, it's doing the impulse exile tribal stuff as well. So fits extra good here. And Ginny Faye Jetmir II, I thought was a really neat fit, a neat way to be using those food tokens. Because she says if you would create 1 or more tokens, you may instead create that many 2/2 green cat creature tokens with haste, or that many 3/1 green dog creature tokens with vigilance. Doesn't have anything to do with creature tokens, right? You can be creating any kind of tokens with Ginny Faye. So those food tokens we are creating, that is a token that we are creating. So of course, we can have those food tokens enter the battlefield as cats or dogs if we want to. So that's a really interesting way to use those food tokens. Of course, we can also use those food tokens as they were originally intended with Wicked Wolf or Giant Opportunity, right? These are cards that actually came out originally with Throne of Eldraine that are using them like they were supposed to be. Wicked Wolf, we can sacrifice a food to put a +1/+1 counter on Wicked Wolf, and it gains indestructible in the turn. So again, fits the +1/+1 counter theme. And I imagine we are going to have lots of food tokens lying around. So it is going to be very easy for us to be making our Wicked Wolf indestructible all the time. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Giant Opportunity is just 3 mana, and you may sacrifice 2 foods. If you do, create a 7/7 green giant creature token. That's pretty good for 3 mana, right? And again, having 2 foods lying around is not going to be very difficult for us. And even if we don't, we get to create 3 food tokens with our Giant Opportunity instead, which ain't bad either. Getting to the really interesting stuff, though, that we are doing with this commander in the Exile Tribal theme, Urabrask Heretic Praetor, I think, is a fantastic fit with Rocco. 3 red, Phyrexian Praetor 4/4. haste at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play it this turn. So of course, we're doing the exile tribal stuff here. I put a little bit of impulse draw in this deck because of course we do want to be doing that. More importantly though, at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, the next time they would draw a card this turn, instead they exile the top card of their library and they may play it this turn. So we are replacing our opponent's draw, which is great, but we are also forcing them to cast stuff from exile, right? Which plays into our commander's ability. We can do this a little bit in the deck. Elkin Lair, favorite old card of mine from back in the day that I'm always trying to find ways to use this card, and this is a great way to use it. It is 3 and a red world enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player exiles a card at random from their hand. That player may play that card this turn. At the beginning of the next end step, if that player hasn't played the card, they may put it into their graveyard. Really great card for hosing certain strategies, I think, in particular like a really heavy control strategy, right? Because it is very likely if your opponent's playing a heavy counterspell deck that they will exile a counterspell from their hand on their turn. And of course, if they don't play it, which they likely won't on their turn, it just gets wasted. That's where this card can be really neat. But of course, it's exiling cards from our opponent's hand that they then have to play from exile. So it triggers our commander's ability. Just another neat card that is going to force our opponents to be casting stuff from exile. Omen Machine is a particularly great way to do this. 6 mana artifact. Players can't draw cards. I'm sure your opponents aren't going to love that. However, at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player exiles the top card of their library. If it's a land card, that player puts it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, that player casts it without paying its mana cost, if able. So I think this is probably an auto-include in most Rocco decks. I guess this card is a little unfun, maybe. I mean, it is a 6 mana artifact. I mean, come on, this is not going to be played right away, and it's really easy to get off the battlefield. Pretty much every color can deal with artifacts, so I don't know why anyone would have an issue with this in a commander game. I think it's actually pretty fun, and it works really, really great with Rocco. The only time it's not so fun is if you play a Drannith Magistrate, which I did put in this deck. And of course, this card is a little unfun sometimes. A lot of people have called for it to get banned because, of course, your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. Now, this seems like a bit of a non-bow with our commander because, of course, this will not allow our opponents to cast stuff from exile. However, I think at a certain point in the game, like if we have our Omen Machine out or maybe our Urabrask out, Drannith Magistrate can really lock our opponents out of the game. And in fact, with Omen Machine, it completely locks them out of the game, right? Not only can they not draw cards, but they can't be casting anything from exile as well. And don't forget, again, our Rocco's triggers when we cast stuff from exile still. So we will still be getting triggers off our commander. So it is a way to help us close out the game. It's not super fun. If you want to do a more jankier, funner version of this deck, you can take out Omen Machine or Drannith Magistrate or both. It does work really well in the deck though. Really interesting commander. Again, Exile Tribal is so incredibly popular right now that this is going to be a great commander no matter what. You could do more impulse draw yourself. I didn't do that as much. You certainly could just play Exile Tribal in Naya colors because of course, whenever you're doing that, you're going to be triggering your commander. I didn't do it as much, but it does certainly work here. There's a lot of really interesting directions you can go with this commander. That's why I like it a lot. If you are interested yourself in playing this deck, I have the deck list in the description below. Feel free to give it a run for yourself. That is it for today though, and thanks for tuning in.